Edgar Allan Poe is best known for his horror stories. Poe understood how to capitalize on sensationalism and horror by writing about the common fears of his day. One of the most pervasive of which was that of being buried alive.
Poe wrote 5 stories in which an unlucky character is entombed while still alive. In The Cask of Amontillado, Montresor seeks revenge on Fortunato by breaking him up inside a wall. In The Fall of the House of Usher, Madeline fatally punishes her brother, who entombed her prematurely. Poor Berenice is not only unintentionally buried alive, but her grieving husband pulls out all of her teeth. In The Black Cat, the narrator accidentally entombs his cat along with the body of his murdered wife. The cat's meows alert the police to his crime. In a surprisingly positive story, the narrator of The Premature Burial faces his fear of being buried alive and has a much rosier outlook on life after the experience.
These stories are works of fiction, but many people really did fear being buried alive. And it wasn't an unfounded phobia. There are several real-life instances of a premature burial.
In 1674, Alice Blunden fell into a deep slumber after drinking a little bit too much poppy water and couldn't be awoken. Assuming that she had died, her doctor ordered her burial. But then a few days later, several students heard screaming from her freshly dug grave. Her coffin was opened to find her body most lamentably beaten. At some point, Alice had woken up and tried to escape the coffin, inflicting severe injuries to herself in the process. Showing no signs of life, she was reburied. But just to be sure, they dug her up the next day to double check. And they did it again. She'd been buried alive twice. They saw further damage to her body, bloody knuckles, bruises, and much worse. At least now, she was definitely dead. And she was buried a third and final time.
In another real-life incident similar to Poe's premature burial, a 19-year-old Frenchman named Angelo or Angel Hayes got into a motorcycle accident in 1937. He was presumed dead and buried. Several days later, his body was exhumed for his insurance company to inspect. Surprisingly, his body was still warm. Turns out he was in a coma, and he made a complete recovery. Angelo went on to invent his own safety coffin and travel the country, boasting his story of beating death.
So what is a safety coffin? Well, it's a type of coffin that was used in the past in order to prevent premature burials. The earliest ones, dating back to the 1700s, had a window on the coffin so that you could peer inside and look for signs of decomposition. Others had tubes leading from the coffin to the ground above so that instead of looking for the decomposition, you could smell it.
Perhaps the most terrifying safety coffin came a few years later. People began inserting a string into the coffin tied around the corpse's finger. The string was then attached to a bell above ground so that they could ring the bell if they woke up inside the coffin. Unfortunately, the inventors did not realize that when the body decomposes, it shifts, and therefore the bells would ring even if the coffin's occupant was actually dead.
Despite all of these inventions, there are no reported incidents of someone actually being saved by a safety coffin. Fortunately, modern medicine has advanced far enough for us to recognize things like coma or shock, both of which could have previously led to a premature burial. It also might help you to know that no one can survive modern embalming or cremations. So when your time comes, you can rest easy.
Well, premature burials are hopefully a thing of the past. But Poe's stories on the subject haunt us to this day. His writings of darkness, claustrophobia, and eternal entrapment are scary enough to make a modern reader's blood run cold. So do yourself a favor and read one of Poe's stories about being buried alive. And thanks for watching.